Section 1. The Illusion of Invincibility. January 10th, 1939. 10:30 p.m. The Abwehr headquarters on Tirpitz, Berlin, Germany. Cigarette smoke hung low and heavy under the green-shaded lamps, curling around the brass rotors of the Enigma machine like a living thing. The oak table was strewn with decoded intercepts, half-empty schnapps, glasses, and maps of Poland already marked in red pencil for the coming storm. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris sat at the head, his thin lips curved in the kind of smile that only absolute certainty can carve. Flanking him were his senior cryptographers and naval liaison officers, their black uniforms sharp as knives, iron crosses catching the light every time they leaned forward to laugh. A junior analyst cleared his throat and read from a fresh report smuggled out of Paris. Served. Our sources inside the French Turing Bureau confirm it. They've been meeting with Polish mathematicians. Something about reconstructing the wiring. They're calling it a serious attempt on our naval traffic. The room exploded. Canaris threw his head back and barked a laugh that rattled the heavy curtains. "Let 'em reconstruct," he snapped, slamming a palm on the table. 150 million combinations. Daily rotor settings changed at midnight by hand. Plugboard cables swapped at random. Even if the Poles stole a machine tomorrow, they would drown in the math before they read a single word. A naval captain broad-shouldered, fresh from Kielin, fingers dancing across the Enigma's keyboard as if it were a piano. He typed a mock message. "Wolfpack assemble, 52 North 15, WEST." The rotor's word, the machine spat out gibberish, and he read the ciphertext aloud with theatrical flair. Then he reset the 3 rotors to the day's secret Grundstellung, typed again, and the original words reappeared clean and lethal. "See," he said, voice dripping contempt. "Our reboot commanders already speak this language in their sleep. Admiral Dunitz tells me his wolfpacks will hunt in packs of 20, guided by these exact orders, and the British will hear nothing but static. Let the Allies waste their nights in their damp little rooms. Our spies in London report the same farce every week. Government code and cipher school, chasing ghosts, mockery in every cable. The Germans believe their toy is unbreakable, they write, and they are right. You could almost taste the arrogance in the air, thick as the tobacco. These were not fools. These were men who had watched the machine evolve from Arthur Scherbius's commercial curiosity into the Reich's nervous system. Every order to the Luftwaffe, every supply manifest to the panzers. Every desperate plea from a surfaced U-boat in the Atlantic, all of it locked inside those spinning rotors and the 26-letter plugboard. The daily key sheets were printed on water-soluble paper, destroyed at dawn. Operators drilled until their fingers bled. The system was foolproof by design, and the Axis spies scattered across Europe loved reminding their handlers of it, in coded dispatches that dripped with sarcasm. Allied code breakers still tilting at windmills, Enigma remains our crown jewel. Canaris lit another cigarette, the flame illuminating the deep lines around his eyes. "The Poles?" he muttered, almost fondly. "Those stubborn mathematicians in their little Warsaw cellar. We are rumors some gadget they call a bomba, a bicycle chain, contraption to test rotor orders." He exhaled a perfect ring of smoke that drifted over the Enigma. Let them peddle, let them pry. Pray, when our tanks roll across their border in a few short months, their mathematicians will be the first to learn what unbreakable truly means. The officers raised their glasses. To Enigma, the toast rang off the walls, crystal clinking like the teeth of a closing trap. Someone dimmed the lamp over the machine, and its metallic face seemed to stare back at them cold, indifferent, eternal. For a moment, the room fell quiet. The only sound the distant hum of Berlin traffic and the soft ticking of the rotors as the captain idly spun them. No one noticed the faint shadow of doubt that never quite formed. No one imagined that the very Poles they mocked had, years earlier, already torn the first hole in the fabric. No one dreamed that a quiet, bespectacled mathematician named Marian Rejewski had stared at the same impossible numbers and seen something the entire German high command had missed. But the laughter was still echoing down the corridor as the meeting broke up. Canaris lingered, staring at the machine. He patted its casing once, almost affect. Sleep well, old friend, he whispered. The Reich is counting on you. Outside, the January wind howled through the tear. Inside, the illusion held perfect, smug, and absolute. Section 2. The Quiet Mathematicians, September 1st, 1932. Late afternoon, a nondescript office on the second floor of the Saxon Palace. Warsaw, Poland. The room smelled of strong coffee, cigarette ash, and the faint metallic temps of typewriter ribbon. 3 young men sat hunched over scattered papers covered in dense columns of letters and numbers. Marian Rejewski, 27, bespectacled, with the calm intensity of a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos, pushed his chair back and rubbed his eyes. Beside him, Jerzy Ariki, barely 23, drummed his fingers on the table. Henryk Sigalski, the eldest at 25, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, staring at a makeshift wooden model of rotors they had built from spare parts in sheer stubbornness. Captain Maximilian Siuki had given Rejewski the assignment in secret weeks earlier. Study intercepted German military messages. Nothing more. No machine. No wiring diagrams, just pages of ciphertext that looked like random gibberish. The French had passed along a few scraps documents from a German traitor, but it was thin. Rejewski had started alone, as ordered, applying pure mathematics, permutation theory, calcul de compositions, the kind of abstract beauty most soldiers would never understand. Now the 3 worked together. The secrecy lifted once the first breakthrough came. You could almost feel the tension in Rejewski's shoulders as he traced another permutation with his pencil. The commercial Enigma they had studied years earlier at Poznań University gave them the basic rotor stepping, but the military version added a plugboard, 26 letters paired in 10 cables, scrambling the signal even further. 6 trillion possibilities for a single day's settings. Yet something in the way the Germans enciphered the message kissed the repeated 3-letter indicator sent twice at the start of every transmission created a tiny, exploitable flaw. Rejewski's voice was quiet, almost reverent. The characteristic. It repeats in cycles. Look here. He slid a sheet across. For each possible rotor order and ground setting, the 6-letter indicator produces a unique pattern of loops. If we catalog enough of them, Yiki whistled low, we build a machine to test them all. 6 enigmas wired together, running in parallel. We call it the bomba. After the ticking bomb, it will become for them. Sigalski chuckled darkly, already sketching perforated sheets on graph paper, his own invention. Grids with holes punched where certain letter pairings could never occur. Stack the sheets for different rotor positions. Shine a light through, and the alignments would reveal the daily key like a constellation suddenly snapping into place. They worked through the night. By December, Rejewski had reconstructed the internal wiring of the 3-rotor site. Unseen using nothing but intercepted traffic and cold logic. The first Polish Enigma double was assembled in a secret workshop by Ava radio engineers. It clicked in word like its German cousin, but now it was theirs. For the next 6 years, the Poles read German secrets as icily as morning newspapers. Wehrmacht orders, Luftwaffe flight plans, even early naval traffic. They fed intelligence to Polish high command, watching the storm clouds gather over the Reich. But they knew the clock was ticking. The Germans improved procedures, more frequent key changes, eventually dropping the repeatable indicators that had been their Achilles heel. Still, the trio adapted. The bomba ticked faster. Sigalski's sheets multiplied into the hundreds. They read messages that spoke of panzer divisions massing, of U-boat training in the Baltic. Every decoded line was a warning Poland's leaders could barely act upon, trapped between 2 tyrants. July 25th, 1939. Pyry Forest, just south of Warsaw, a sweltering wooden hut guarded by soldiers. British and French intelligence officers arrived under heavy secrecy. Commander Alistair Denistan of the British GC and CS, Captain Gustave Bertrand of the French Douim Bureau. The Poles had decided. The time for hoarding had ended. War was days away. Rejewski, Ariki, and Sigalski stood before a table. On it rested 2 working Polish Enigma doubles. Blueprints, the cyclometer for cataloging rotor characteristics, stacks of Sigalski sheets, and detailed notes on every method they had perfected. Rejewski spoke simply, without pride. "We have been reading Enigma since 1932. Here is how we did it. Take everything. Use it well." Well, Deniston's face went pale as the implications sank in. The British had been battering their heads against the same wall for years, achieving almost nothing. Now the Poles handed them the keys. As the meeting ended, the visitors were given the machines to smuggle out. One said went west with the French, another route prepared for Britain. Rejewski watched the crates loaded into civilian cars, his expression unreadable. He knew the gift might save millions of lives. He also knew Poland itself had perhaps only weeks left. Outside, the pines whispered in the summer breeze. Birds called. Somewhere in Berlin, German cryptographers were still laughing over their schnapps, utterly convinced of their machine's perfection. But the first cracks had already widened into fissures, and the quiet mathematicians of Warsaw had just passed the torch. Far to the west, in a quiet English country house, soon to be known as Bletchley Park, the real war of minds was about to accelerate. Section 3. The torch arrives at Bletchley September 3rd, 1939, 11:17 a.m. Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. The declaration of war had crackled over the BBC barely 2 hours earlier. Now the Grand Victorian Mansion and its surrounding huts buzzed with frantic energy. Civilian mathematicians, linguists, and chess champions, recruited in secret through crossword puzzles and university networks, bored through the gates, clutching suitcases and nervous excitement. In Hut 4, a tall, pipe-smoking man with a shock of unruly hair paced before a long table. Alan Turing, brilliant, awkward, already legendary among the few who knew him, stopped as 2 wooden crates were carried in under armed guard. The labels were innocuous. Agricultural machinery, handled with care. Commander Alistair Deniston watched the lids pried open. Inside lay the Polish Enigma doubles, gleaming dials and rotors, accompanied by thick folders of notes in precise Polish handwriting. Turing's eyes lit up with something close to hunger. "So this is what the Poles gave us," he murmured, fingers already tracing the wiring diagram Rejewski had drawn. "They've done the impossible. Now, we make it sing." Within days, the bomb was born, not the Polish ticking contraption, but something far more powerful. Turing's design, an electromechanical monster the size of a wardrobe, capable of testing thousands of rotor combinations per minute. It clicked and clattered like a demonic loom, driven by relays and spinning drums. The first prototype, christened Victory, was installed in Hut 8 under the watchful eye of naval cryptanalyst Frank Birch. But the Germans had not stood still. By early 1940, the Kriegsmarine had tightened. New rotors 4 and V appeared. The plugboard settings grew more complex. Daily keys changed with ruthless efficiency. U-boat traffic, the most critical lifeline of the Battle of the Atlantic, became almost unreadable again. Convoy losses mounted. British sailors died in freezing oil-slicked waters while the codebreakers stared at mountains of undecipherable intercepts. You could feel the frustration in the huts at night. The endless clack of typewriters, the smell of strong tea and cigarette smoke, the hollow-eyed mathematicians who slept on camp beds between shifts. Turing chain-smoked, scribbled on blackboards, and occasionally rode his bicycle wearing a gas mask to avoid hay fever. Gord Welchman refined the diagonal board that dramatically sped up the bomb. Peter, Twin, and others attacked Enigma with ferocious ingenuity. Still, the wolfpacks hunted almost at will. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. May 9th, 1941. The choppy waters north of Iceland. The German weather trawler Munchen was surprised by British destroyers. In the scramble to scuttle, the crew threw code books overboard, but not fast enough. British boarding parties recovered the current Enigma settings for April and May, plus rotor wheels and plugboard configurations. Within oars, the material reached Bletchley. Hut 8 erupted. Turing's bombs, now running day and night, began to sink. The first naval pinch had cracked the daily key, but it was temporary. The real prize came weeks later, May 27th, 1941. The frigid Atlantic, 400 miles west of Brest. 110, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp, attacked convoy OB-318. Depth charges from HMS Abricia and Bulldog forced the U-boat to the surface. As the crew abandoned ship, a British boarding party led by Sub-Lieutenant David Balm raced across in a ware. They found the Enigma machine still plugged in, rotors set, and miraculously the current codebooks and short signal books intact. The Germans had been so confident the submarine would sink that they left the crown jewels behind. The material was rushed to Bletchley under the highest secrecy. Code-named Pinch, it gave the Allies not just 1 month's settings, but the entire Kriegsmarine's operating procedures for short weather and sighting reports. Turing and his team worked around the clock. The bomb's word, Shark, the name given to the Atlantic. U-boat, Enigma, net began to yield its secrets. For the first time, the British could read Donitz's orders almost as quickly as his U-boat captains. Wolfpack positions, Brenda's boost points, refueling schedules. The veil was lifting. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath in Hut 8 that night. The sudden, electric realization that the smug laughter in Berlin had been built on sand. The unbreakable machine was talking. Yet even as ultra-intelligence began flowing to the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, a darker truth emerged. The information was so good, so impossibly detailed that using it carelessly could betray the source. If the Germans suspected Enigma had been broken, they would change everything overnight. Churchill himself demanded absolute secrecy. The code breakers lived under a suffocating blanket of silence. Families, friends, even most of the British military had no idea what happened inside those drab wooden huts. But at sea, the tide was turning. British escorts began appearing exactly where wolfpacks gathered. Convoys altered course hours before the ambush. U-boat losses climbed from a trickle to a steady hemorrhage. In Berlin, Admiral Donetz paced his office, increasingly uneasy. His captains radioed desperate questions. How do the Tommies always know? The Abwehr reassured him. Impossible. Enigma is mathematically invulnerable. The laughter had not yet died, but it was growing thinner. And in the quiet English countryside, the machines kept ticking faster, hungrier, ready for the next devastating revelation. Section 4. The Wolfpacks bleed, March 1943. The black, freezing Atlantic, 3:47 a.m. Convoyachi, X2. Those 940 ships strung out like beads across the heaving sea, plowed westward under a moonless sky. In the operations room at Weston Approach's command in Liverpool, a young Wren officer pinned another red flag on the enormous wall chart. The flag marked U-338. Capit. Note none Manfred Kinsel. Already credited with sinking 4 ships that night. Around it, a growing cluster of other red pins formed the deadly crescent of a wolf, but this time the pins were moving because of Ultra. In Hut 8 at Bletchley, the night shift had broken the shark settings just after midnight. Turing's improved 4-rota bombs, now running 24 hours a day, had delivered the day's keys. In under 18 minutes, the decoded message was chillingly clear. Donetz to all boats. Concentrate on HX 2-9 attack at wheel. Good hunting. Admiral Sir Max Horton, the iron-willed commander of Western Approaches, read the decrypt within the hour. He did not celebrate. He simply picked up the telephone. Divert the escort groups, vector support groups here and here, and tell the Americans their hunter-killer group is cleared to move south immediately. At sea, the escort commander on HMS Volunteer received the coded signal. He altered course without question. The destroyers and corvettes swung north, their Aztec pinks cutting through the water like invisible knives. They knew nothing of Bletchley. They only knew that tonight, for once, they were hunting instead of being hunted. You could almost feel the shift in the ocean itself. One by one, the U-boats were found. Depth charge patterns walked across the surface, throwing geysers of white water into the night. U-638 took a direct hit and vanished in a spreading oil slick. U-665 was rammed and sunk by a corvette that appeared out of nowhere. Kinzel in U-338 pressed the attack bravely, but his torpedoes found only empty sea where the convoy should have been. By dawn, the Wolfpack was shattered. HX 229 lost 30 in ships Baneful. but a fraction of what it would have been without the invisible warning from Bletchley in Berlin. The mood in the Kriegsmarine headquarters had soured from smug confidence to raw frustration. Admiral Karl Dunitz slammed a fist on his desk. How do they know every time we assemble a pack? Our captains swear the British appear as if guided by the devil himself. His cryptographers, pale and exhausted, insisted the impossible. Enigma cannot be broken. The mathematics forbid it. There must be spies, or radar, or traitors. In our own ranks, Canaries, ever cautious, ordered deeper investigations. But the laughter that once filled the Turpitsufa rooms had turned brittle. The boasts about 150 million combinations now sounded like a bad joke told too many times. Meanwhile, at Bletchley, the pressure was crushing. The codebreakers lived on Benzedrine, tea, and willpower. They watched the Atlantic chart in the Admiralty's bunker and saw the red pins disappear one by one. Every sunk U-boat meant dozens of young German sailors gone forever, yet also meant food and fuel reaching Britain, meant the difference between starvation and survival for an entire nation. Alan Turing walked the grounds at dusk, hands deep in his pockets, face gaunt. He knew the human cost on both sides. He also knew the alternative. If the wolfpacks won the Battle of the Atlantic, Britain would be strung-led. The invasion of Europe impossible. The war lost. Then came Black May. May 1943. The Atlantic became a graveyard for the Kriegs. Ultra-decrypts guided escort groups and long-range liberator bombers with deadly precision. Support groups, fast hunter-killer forces built around escort carriers, roamed the seas, guided by Bletchley's daily keys. In 1 month alone, 41 U-boats were destroyed. Dunitz lost more boats in May than in the entire previous year. On May 24th, Dunitz was forced to withdraw his remaining wolfpacks from the North Atlantic. In his war diary, he wrote bitterly, "The enemy holds every trump card. He knows our dispositions, our strength, our plans. He did not know how, but the illusion of invincibility had cracked wide open. The Poles who had first pierced the Rejewski, Yiki were now scattered. Ariki had drowned tragically when the French ship he sailed on was torpedoed in 1942. Zagulski and Rejewski had escaped to Britain via Spain and Portugal, working quietly in exile, their monumental contributions still hidden under layers of secrecy. At Bletchley, they were known only as the Polish Gift. Few even knew their names, yet their mathematics, fused with Turing's genius and the courage of the men who risked their lives to capture codebooks from sinking U-boats, had turned the tide. The smug security of 1939 Berlin had become exposed vulnerability by the spring of 1943. The veil was not merely torn, but the war was far from over. In the deserts of North Africa, in the skies over Europe, and soon on the beaches of Normandy, Ultra would strike again deeper, faster, more decisively. And the Germans, still refusing to believe their beloved machine had betrayed them, would pay an even heavier price.
Section 5. The Desert Fox exposed October 23, 1942. 21:40 hours. Alamein, Western Desert, Egypt. The night sky erupted in a wall of flame. Over 1,000 British and Commonwealth guns opened fire in the greatest artillery barrage. Since the Somme, shells screamed overhead, turning the desert sand into a churning hell of smoke and shrapnel. In his forward command post, General Bernard Montgomery watched the inferno through field glasses. Jaw set, knowing the next few days would decide the fate of North Africa. What Montgomery did not broadcast to his troops, what only a handful at the very top knew, was that he already held the Desert Fox's battle plan in his pocket. Hours earlier, in a heavily guarded hut at Bletchley Park, a decrypt from the German Army's Chaffinch Enigma network had landed on the desk of intelligence officer F.W. Winterbotham. The message was pure gold. Rommel to Panzer Army Africa. Intention is to hold present line with 90th Light and 15th Panzer holding the northern sector. 21st Panzer in reserve. Fuel and ammunition critical. Expect major British attack the 24th to the 26th of October. All units stand to. Ultra had delivered Rommel's entire order of battle, his supply situation, even the exact timing he anticipated for the Allied assault. You could almost feel the electric charge that ran through Montgomery's headquarters when the sanitized Ultra summary arrived. No mention of how it was obtained, just cold facts. The codebreakers had turned the invisible into the invincible. Montgomery adjusted his plan accordingly. He feinted in the south, masked his real punch in the north. And when Rommel's panzers counterattacked exactly where Ultra said they would, British anti-tank guns and artillery were waiting in perfect ambush. For 12 brutal days, the battle raged under the desert sun. Dust-choked engines, heat-stroke-felled men, but the intelligence advantage never wavered. Every German movement, every desperate request for fuel from Italy, every Luftwaffe sortie, planned read at Bletchley within hours, and passed to Montgomery in carefully laundered form. When Rommel finally ordered a fighting withdrawal on November 2nd, it was too late. His famous Africa Corps was shattered. Thousands of prisoners marched into captivity. The road to Tripoli lay open. In Berlin, the mood was one of stunned disbelief. Hitler raged at the map table. Rommel tells me, "The British appeared to know our every move. How is this possible? Our Enigma is unbreakable. Our own experts swear it." Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel could only shrug helplessly. Main Führer, the mathematicians insist the machine is secure. Perhaps treachery in the field. But the pattern was repeating. In the Atlantic, the wolfpacks had already bled. Now in the desert, the legendary Desert Fox was being systematically outmaneuvered by an enemy who seemed to read his mind. The codebreakers at Bletchley pushed themselves to exhaustion. New bombs larger, faster, built in factories under conditions of total secrecy, tackled the army and Luftwaffe keys with growing success. Welchman's diagonal board and Turing's statistical methods sliced through daily settings in minutes rather than hours. Yet the greatest test still lay ahead. June 6, 1944. 5:30 hours. Normandy coast, France. Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, was underway. Thousands of ships darkened the channel. Paratroopers drifted under silk canopies. Men waded through bullet-laced surf toward the deadly beaches of Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Again, Ultra had prepared the way. For months, Bletchley had read the German High Command's frantic messages about fortitude, the elaborate deception that convinced Hitler the main invasion would come at Pas de Calais. Enigma decrypts revealed the exact location and strength of every German division in France. When Rommel, now commanding Army Group B, requested reinforcements for Normandy, Hitler, convinced by the deception, refused. On D-Day itself, Luftwaffe Enigma traffic told the Allies exactly where the few available German fighters were based and when they would scramble. Coastal batteries reported their ammunition states. Panzer divisions radioed their fuel shortages in real time. Montgomery and Eisenhower moved their forces like pieces on a chessboard, where only they could see the opponent's next move. You can almost hear the stunned silence in German command posts as reports flooded in. The enemy is landing in strength at Normandy. But how did they know our weakest sectors? By the end of the Normandy campaign, the German army in the west had been bled white. The road to Paris, then to the Rhine, lay open. Back in Berlin, the once boastful laughter had turned to something closer to panic. Canaris's Abwehr launched frantic investigations. What? New Enigma procedures were introduced, more rotors. More frequent changes, but each improvement came too late and only added to the chaos. The mathematicians who had once mocked the Poles now worked in a fever of denial, recalculating permutations that no longer matched reality. Meanwhile, Rejewski and Henryk Zagulski, and quietly in Britain under assumed names, continued their quiet contribution, still unknown to almost everyone outside the innermost circle. The Axis veil had not simply been lifted. From the icy Atlantic, to the burning sands of Africa, to the bloody beaches of Normandy, the unbreakable machine had become the greatest intelligence windfall in military history. The smug security of 1939 had become total catastrophic exposure. But one final chapter remained. In the snows of the Ardennes, in the skies over Germany, and in the ruined streets of Berlin itself, the last illusions would be shattered forever.
Section 6. The Final Unraveling. December 16th, 1944. 5:30 a.m. The frozen Ardennes forest, Belgium. A savage artillery barrage tore through the pre-dawn darkness. German shells screamed down on American positions, lighting the snow-covered pines in flashes of orange and white. Hitler's last great gamble operation watch on the Rhine, better known as the Battle of the Bulge, had begun. Nearly 200,000 German troops, supported by hundreds of panzers, surged forward through the thin Allied lines, aiming to split the American and British armies and seize Antwerp. In the map room at AEF headquarters in Versailles, General Dwight D. Eisenhower stared at the unfolding crisis. The initial reports were grim. Fog grounded Allied air support. Communications were shattered, and German spearheads were punching deep into the Ardennes. But once again, Ultra was already speaking. Bletchley Park had intercepted and decrypted Luftwaffe and Enigma traffic, revealing the full scope of the offensive days before it launched. The Germans had tried to impose radio silence, but the sheer scale of the operation made total silence impossible. Fuel shortages, exact timetables for the panzer thrusts, even the names of key commanders all had been read in near real time. Eisenhower made his decisions with that hidden knowledge. He rushed reserves north and south to contain the bulge. He ordered Patton's Third Army to swing 90 degrees and relieve the besieged 101st Airborne at Bus. Every move was calibrated because the Allies knew exactly where the German hammer would fall next. You could almost feel the frustration radiating from German command posts as their carefully husbanded fuel ran out. Their panzers ground to a halt in the snow, and American reinforcements appeared precisely where they were most needed. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding the offensive, later admitted bitterly, "We were met everywhere by an enemy who seemed to anticipate our every intention." By late January 1945, the bulge was reduced to a bloody The Germans had lost over 100,000 men and nearly all their remaining mobile reserves. The road to the Rhine, ultimately to Berlin, now lay open with nothing substantial left to stop the Allied advance. In Berlin, the bunker atmosphere had turned from denial to something darker. Hitler, gaunt and trembling, raged at his generals. "Enigma has betrayed us. The British and Americans read our orders before our own commanders. This is treason at the highest level." His cryptographers, now working under threat of execution, desperately introduced new procedures. The introduction of a fourth rotor for naval traffic had already been overcome. Now even more complex settings for Army and Luftwaffe keys. But each change only bought weeks, sometimes days. The bombs at Bletchley Park, now dozens of them, improved with Turing as his statistical banbarismus, and Welchman's innovations devoured the new keys with relentless efficiency. The once mocked Polish mathematicians had long since passed the baton, but their original insights remained the foundation. Rejewski and Zygalski, still in exile, occasionally contributed from the sidelines, their role still cloaked in absolute secrecy. By spring 1945, Ultra was reading almost everything. When the Red Army launched its final offensive on Berlin in April, the Western Allies already knew the desperate state of German defenses from decrypted messages. They knew Hitler's exact location in the Vorbunker. They knew the last futile counterattacks were ordered by a man who had lost all grip on reality. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet shells rained down on the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler took his own life. The man who had once trusted Enigma as the shield of the Reich died, knowing his greatest technological marvel had instead become the sword that cut his empire to pieces. A week later, on May 8th, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In the Terpitzufer building in Berlin now, a smoking ruin, there would be no more laughter over schnapps and Enigma machines. The officers who had once boasted of 150 million combinations were either dead, captured, or fleeing westward to surrender to the Western Allies rather than the Soviets. At Bletchley Park, the codebreakers quietly shut down their machines. The bombs fell silent. The huts emptied. The greatest intelligence secret of the war was locked away under the Official Secrets Act for decades. Churchill ordered the Polish Enigma machines destroyed or hidden. The heroic contributions of Rejewski, Ariki, and Zygalski remained unknown to the public and even to most veterans for nearly 30 years. Yet the story of Enigma is ultimately one of hubris meeting humility. The Germans had laughed at the very idea that their unbreakable machine could be defeated by a handful of Polish mathematicians in a Warsaw cellar. They had mocked the Allies' clumsy attempts. They had placed absolute faith in mathematics and engineering while ignoring the quiet power of human ingenuity. That faith cost them the Battle of the Atlantic, North Africa, Normandy, the Ardennes, and ultimately the war itself. From the smug security of a Berlin conference room in 1939 to the shattered ruins of the Reich in 1945. The veil had not merely been lifted, it had been burned away in the fires of Ultra. The quiet mathematicians of Poland had cracked open the door. The brilliant minds at Bletchley had thrown it wide, and the Axis, blinded by their own arrogance, never saw the blow coming until it was far too late. The war that Enigma was meant to win had instead been lost because of it, and somewhere, in the long silence that followed, one can still hear the faint, final echo of that once confident laughter, now reduced to ashes. End.